You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe rides again. Nick Wilson, Spencer German with you. I'm Nick, he's Spencer, and we got quite a show for you today with Big Ten Media Days going on. Of course, we've got Ross Bjork on the appearance on 92.3 The Fan, our home station last week. We got to get to that. We got to get to Four Down Territory, 4 stories that we've been keeping an eye on and would like to react to. But as we are a relatively new podcast, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary in October. Please make sure to follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, 92.3 The Fan, 92.3thefan.com, of course, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? Please follow Sons of the Shoe and follow along on our YouTube channel. Just search 92.3 The Fan, and you'll see us under the playlist there. Please make sure to like our videos, comment on it. We love interacting with you guys. And hi, Spencer. How you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm glad to see that we got off without a hitch this time around. No recording issues. We are starting from a clean slate, and happy to be back with you. And I'm happy to be, honestly, like, once we get to, I think, like, obviously SEC Media Days, which was 2 weeks ago, and then we get Big Ten Media Day this week. Once we get to that point, it feels like college football is kind of already back, because next week we start getting teams showing up to campus and they start camps and all these different things. So I'm very excited about the fact that college football is nearly here.
Well, I'm very proud of you for remembering to record today's episode right off the rip. This is a big moment for you. In fairness, I should not bust your balls about this because it was the first time you've done it in the entirety of our podcast together.
Yeah, we're only like, what? We made it 10 months before we had any issues with that?
So, like, I really have no reason to bust your balls other than I'm just an unforgiving son of a bitch. But, no, I mean, this is, last week was SEC Media Days. This week was Big Ten Media Days. And it's just been interesting to watch the framing of Ohio State and the all-in mentality for this year. And it really seems to be one of two camps. Like, we had Brett McMurphy on Action Network, College Football Insider, yesterday on my show, Afternoon Drive, on 92.3 The Fan. Make sure to listen 2 to 7 every single weekday. But he was incredulous that anybody would say Ryan Day is entering this season on the hot seat. And then you have Paul Feinbaum, courtesy of ESPN, courtesy of their Big Ten Media Days, the SEC Media Days, all this, the return of college football media coverage, and he went ham on Ryan Day.
Oh, sorry.
That was such a good setup. That was such a good set. That was so professionally done by me, the least professional man in all of radio. And this is where we go.
Well, so I don't have that one because I was worried about using a video clip from ESPN. You tell me, do you think we're okay to just use the audio from it?
Yes. Yeah, I think we're fine.
All right, real quick then.
You want me to set it up?
Hold on. No,
So actually, you know what? Here, listen. Let's just, instead of playing the audio, everybody's heard it. If you're an Ohio State fan, basically, Paul Feinbaum mocked Ryan Day. Ryan Day basically made this big thing. Hey, all these guys are coming back. Our focus is beating Michigan. You can't be too focused on it. You don't want to take your eye off every week. And, he talked about, the returning team and all this. And Paul Feinbaum, but just basically on national TV, ridiculed Ryan Day and just ripped him, saying, you can't really say that everybody's all in to beat Michigan when you haven't beat Michigan in 3 straight tries. And I think, I'll be honest, I think we encapsulated that. I don't think we really need the Feinbaum sound because I think we kind of nailed it there. But, what it reminded me of is, and I don't want to accuse Paul of this because I think Paul, I actually see a tremendous value in Paul. I think he's hilarious. I think he's great at what he does. But I think there's a lot of people rooting for Ohio State to fail. And I think we probably should have stumbled upon this earlier, Spencer. I can tell you for a fact there were people at the heyday of Clemson rooting for Dabo Swinney to fall. And now that Dabo is, I mean, they're not exactly Pitt, but they're certainly not where Clemson was, in the mix for the national title every single year. And they haven't really been that for the last 3 or 4 seasons. But you could definitely tell that there were undertones of people were bored. See, it's not anti-Ohio State, although some of it could be. But it's people get bored with monopolies, right? Like people get bored with the truly elite dynasty level performance. I do think it's why every time that Alabama had a down year, which was basically being like the 5 seed and missing the 14 playoff by one spot, why everybody lined up to say, yeah, Alabama's going in the wrong direction. And I think people look at Ohio State. Ohio State has run roughshod over this conference for, 2 decades. And I know the last 3 years have been different because Michigan's won that game. But you were in the playoffs 2 years ago with Georgia on the ropes with a chance to go ahead and win it. And Georgia, obviously, the eventual champions. I think people smell blood in the water with Ohio State. And I think people are enjoying this idea that this year could push out a very successful coach and that might further destabilize Ohio State and open up the Big Ten. I absolutely think there are people rooting for Ohio State to fail just so it might make the Big Ten more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I also think you bring up Dabo Swinney, which is a good point. I think part of this boils down to as well with Ryan Day that he's become this like unlikable individual. I think Dabo's kind of gone through the same thing. We make fun of on this show Dabo's comments all the time about actually I think one of the weeks that you were gone, I played a clip of him talking about why he doesn't use the transfer portal, right? And so we make fun of him for a lot of his comments when it comes to, well, this is why I don't do it this way. And he's all about like, yeah, we just kind of follow God's lead. And like, he's very spiritual in that way. And he's become very unlikable because of that. And, his talk about like paying players over the years and things like that. And I'm not saying Ryan Day, he's unlikable for a different reason. Like, it's not that he doesn't embrace that stuff. He's actually probably one of these coaches at a higher level who has embraced this stuff. But I think people look at like the calling out Lou Holtz last year. And when we talked about it last week, like his very robotic nature and the way that he does things and the way that he comes off. And does he really get the rivalry? Does he really emphasize the rivalry with Michigan the way that we think he should? Those are all problems I think that people pick up on. And if you're going to be sort of fraudulent or not authentic with those things, people are going to notice it. So yeah, I do think there's a contingency of people. What's interesting too, Nick, is it's not just people outside of Ohio State, because Ohio State, we know, is a cult. Really, all these college fan bases tend to be culty, but Ohio State especially. And when you're in it, you don't see it that way. But outside of the program, like, of course, there's a lot of people all over the country who are like, I don't like Ryan Day. I don't like Ohio State. I'm not going to root for them. And they, want to see them fail, just like most big time programs. But I also think like even inside the program, and I know this because we have a host at our station who went to Ohio State, who seems like he's sometimes just rooting against Ohio State just so that they get rid of Ryan Day. There are people inside the fan base who want Ryan Day gone so badly that they're kind of like, yeah, I want to beat Michigan. But if we were to lose, it's not the end of the world because that would be the end of Ryan Day. And that's kind of the mindset they have going into this year, which is wild to me.
So I want to draw 2 actual distinctions. Dabo is widely disliked across college football.
Yes. So much so that even his own alma mater, like the fans were lining up when Nick Saban retired, and they were chanting that they didn't want Dabo Swinney.
Which, by the way, not great. No, I mean, I think that. Well, no, I mean, Dabo. Listen, for all what Dabo stands for,
yeah,
Dabo would have been just as good of a hire as Kalen DeBoer. Now, to get back to it though, he is beloved in Clemson.
Yeah.
And the reason why he'd never leave there is he knows he can go 10-4 to the rest of time, and people are going to be talking about those 2 national championships, and he's made in the shade. But it is people nationally that think he is a fraud. And it's more about his previous comments on paying players. It's more on his previous comments, the perception that he banned players from having public stances in kind of pivotal, moments as it relates to like current events that were going on, especially in the tumultuous summer of 2020. So that's different than Ryan Day. Ryan Day is pretty widely respected across college football as an innovator, as somebody who has this thing humming at about as high a level as you possibly can. And it's in Columbus that he is not respected. It is in Columbus that, and when I say in Columbus, I mean in that Ohio State fiefdom where people look at him and go, this dude's a clown. He hasn't beat Michigan in 3 years. He hasn't won a national championship, and he was born on third base. I mean, going so far as to agree with Jim Harbaugh. And I also think that's an important distinction to make, because when we talk about are people rooting for the destabilization of Ohio State, I think on a national level, it is, we want Ohio State, we want Ryan, we would love to see Ryan Day fired, because maybe Ohio State takes 2 steps back instead of a step forward, and that makes the Big Ten more interesting because dominance is boring. And so that's what I think is outside Columbus. I think inside Columbus, it's we want this thing destabilized because we're sure somebody else can get us across the finish line. And I just think those two, the differences between those two things, where Dabo's beloved, where he's hated, where Ryan Day's beloved, where he's hated, and the idea behind destabilization, it is 2 sides uniting for a common goal, but the actual end game is much different. And that's my word of caution to Ohio State fans is, I listen, when I hear Ryan Day talk about the Michigan rivalry, I roll my eyes too. It sounds like it sounds like a historian talking in theoretics about a rivalry instead of a man that has lived the rivalry since he became the Ohio State head coach. I hate that. He does not sound organic. He does not sound it just doesn't sound as authentic or real as I want it to for a head coach, the way I knew it sounded with Urban Meyer, the way I knew it sounded with Jim Tressel, and honestly, the way I knew it sounded for 1 year with damn Luke Fickell. When he was the interim coach, even that was a disaster of a season. So I have my criticisms of Ryan as well. And I probably am just begrudgingly on board with this idea of it's beat Michigan and or contend for a national title this year, because I think that's a fair assumption. I think that's a fair expectation after, 5 years with Ryan Day. At the same point, be careful what you ask for, because some of those people doing the heavy lifting, some of those people in the media who are trying to get Ryan fired too, or wanting to put more pressure on him, some of them want nothing more than Ohio State to be a 6-win team next year. And it's possible. I think there's this mentality for Ohio State, well, anyone can do it. The John Cooper era will tell you otherwise. And I know Earl Bruce had some good years, but the Earl Bruce years will tell you, like, this thing you can hire your Rich Rodriguez, and you got a guy in Ross Bjork who, if I want to, raise some funds here, Spencer, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, get that dude. He's working. He is. I mean, get that dude out. If I want to hire a head coach, have you seen this dude's track record? So this idea that what's best for Ohio State is that Ryan Day fails, and that call's coming from inside the house. Stop huffing paint and get with reality here, because I respectfully, if it has to be done, I get it. I think there will be plenty of suitors who will be lining up to take this job. You still got to make the right hire. So I don't look at, I can't say that I'm rooting for Ryan Day to fail, because I know that it's much easier to take 2 steps back from here than 1 step forward. And I'm certainly not going to take a handout from anybody outside of the Ohio State fan base who I think has ulterior motives about why or why not they want Ryan Day to fail.
I mean, to me, like, the thing that is sort of, I don't want to even say like stunning or shocking, is like the adamancy that there's a clear-cut better option out there. And I get why everyone jumps to the Vrabel thing. Mike Vrabel was just on the Part of My Take podcast this past week, and he was asked straight up about coaching in college. And I'm going to tell you right now, like, his answer did not sound like a person who's like really he said, never say never. That's the classic answer you give when you're just like, yeah, I don't want to, like, I'm not going to say no, but I'm not going to say yes because I don't really want to, what I mean? Like, it was such a vague, just
Yeah,
standard thing.
but he can't come out and say never unless
Right.
it's Ohio State, which I think was my takeaway.
Yeah, that's fair. But it just didn't sound like any, and his conversation divulged from that into just straight up talking about like Luke Fickell at Wisconsin and the conversations he has with him about how things have changed so much. And we know that guy's not somebody who loves going out and trying to like sell kids on. He's talked about it. Like when he was working under Urban Meyer, it wasn't his favorite thing in the world to do. So I don't know who's walking through that door. And that's kind of the tough thing for me is like, I understand where everyone's going to make the John Cooper comparisons and say, well, Ryan Day hasn't done this, this, and this. And listen, if it gets to a point where it's like, hey, the expectation's higher, we got to do something different, I understand. But just this adamancy that there's an obvious upgrade out there, like you just never know. And I think that's probably the problem that I have. Now, I do think like Paul Feinbaum, he's in the business of generating buzz and
He's
saying
also
things.
an SEC honk, which
Yes.
I say with love and respect for Paul.
Right. And like he's in the business of trying to like generate clicks and get people really, as are we to an extent, but like he's got to have
everyone's trying to get people to watch their product. Yeah,
right.
That's not
So, he's got to have the take where he goes on and says like, hey, Ryan Day, I don't know what you do well. And actually, you know what? I actually think that line is like everyone pulled that line out. And I don't necessarily think like if he's for him to say that, I think there's a lot of Ohio State fans who feel the same way. They're like, well, what is he great at? Like, is he really and I do think there's signs of like, okay, he's developed quarterbacks at Ohio State better than any other coach has. So there are certainly remnants of that. But that's kind of what I think is interesting is like this year. And I also clearly like he knows how to a staff together that's helped him be so successful in recruiting. He must do very well on his recruiting trips because they're bringing in top recruits every single year. So I think you can tangibly see there are things that he does well. So I don't know that Paul Feinbaum has like a clear view on that, making that take. But at the same time, like I think there's probably Ohio State fans who are saying the exact same thing. And I just like if there's a year where you should be rooting for Ryan Day, not against him, it feels like it's this year because he's basically like he swallowed his pride this year and basically said, okay, look, you guys are right. Maybe me doing the calling the plays. And that's maybe the one thing, the biggest thing people can look at and say, are you the best play caller in certain situations? Should you be doing this? He swallowed his pride and he's saying, I'm taking a step back. I'm going to sort of be the CEO role and I'm going to bring in an offensive coordinator, handle the play calling, and I'll handle sort of all the overarching stuff and we'll kind of go from there. So he kind of conceded to you like, you know what? You're right. I don't do everything well. So here's me now trying to build this super team. And I think that includes like the changes he made on the coaching staff and some of the things that he handed off and kind of allowing himself to now just focus on the things that he does do well, which are recruiting, which are, building the culture at Ohio State, which we can say all we want that like he doesn't get certain aspects of it. It does feel like guys seem pretty bought into. I mean, there's that clip of Justin Fields from I think 2 years ago where he was talking about how he wasn't sure he was going to transfer to Ohio State, but Ryan Day was a big proponent of like making sure he got his money and got paid to come to Ohio State. Like he looks out for his players and the players appreciate that. Like you need somebody like that in college football today. So again, I'm not saying he's going to, if he loses to Michigan again, I'm sure there's a discussion to be had. I know we're going to talk more about like the pressures that come with this season, especially with Ross Bjork being a new AD that's coming to take over oversee the athletic department. And so he might get fired. Yes, that's very true. But I don't know that I'm not in the ship right now of just like, well, grass is greener on the other side. There's somebody better out there because sometimes you like Texas thought the same thing when Mac Brown left. USC thought the same thing when Pete Carroll left. And neither of those programs, Texas, I guess now is finally getting back. But neither of those, it took those programs both a long time to kind of get back to prominence.
So I actually want to carry this over. We are going to hear Ross Bjork, new Ohio State athletic director, on his feelings on Ryan Day. But I actually think we got to flip the Paul Feinbaum thing on its ear, because the statement that Paul made, or the question that Paul asked, what does Ryan Day do well? I actually think that's a negative question. But I think the opposite, I actually think it's just a pragmatic question. We'll get to that, but first, a quick word from our sponsors.
All right, Feinbaum, and then just so we know what we have this time. Um,
So I think, Spencer, when you look at Paul Feinbaum's question to Ryan Day, what is it that you do well? I think we can fairly say that that's probably a pretty insulting question,
yeah,
and I think it is an intentionally insulting question. I would actually flip it on its ear. And I would, because I think a pragmatic question is, what does Ryan Day not do well? And because I think there's the obvious, he doesn't beat Michigan well.
Can I just say? Can I just say real quick too? Like
You may.
him asking that question, like Ryan Day is a field goal away, like a missed field goal away from that not even being a question that anybody asks. Like if he beats Georgia 2 years ago and they go out and win the national championship over TCU, nobody is asking, what does Ryan Day do well? You know what I'm saying? Like we're all like, oh, hey, yeah, we still haven't beaten Michigan, but we got a national championship under our belts while he's been here. So it's just funny to me that like, and I get like that's the business, right? Like we have the ability to judge off of one or two plays every single. I mean, even the Michigan game last year, it came down to an interception from Kyle McCord, who we know was dog doo-doo all season long. If that play goes differently and he hits Marvin Harrison Jr. in stride, maybe it's a touchdown and Ohio State's winning that game. So it's funny that it comes down to like one or two little moments. But like to judge somebody with a like you said, an insulting question that's just straight up, what does he even do well? It's like, dude, if that field goal goes in against Georgia, Paul Feinbaum isn't on ESPN asking that question right now.
Yeah, but I mean, you could say that about every coach in America. I mean, I think every
Except Nick
coach.
Saban. He pretty much established like.
No, I mean, I think Nick got. It's funny. We're gonna forget about this because we do this after greats retire. Nick Saban got a ton of crap, including from Paul Feinbaum, even though he did polish his shoes a couple times as well. But it's interesting. Like, I think the obvious thing is he doesn't get it. He has not gotten his team up for Michigan, and I think that's rooted in. I think Michigan just wanted it more the last couple of years. And when I say wanted it more, I mean they were every bit as good of a team as you were talent-wise. You might have had them by a nose in talent the two previous years, but this last year they were a super team. They had all these super seniors and COVID year guys and fifth year, grad trans, all this crap. So I think there's just a misunderstanding of that. Now, for instance, I can say Ryan Day is an elite recruiter. I don't know he's a good roster builder. I mean, I think like for me, the things that matter when we stack up a roster, the same is true in college football that it is for me in the NFL. I'm looking at who's your quarterback, and I'm looking at what does your trenches look like. And so maybe this is unfair because they literally rebuilt the defense with a completely different defensive system from what it had been under Urban when they hired Jim Knowles. But like this year's like a huge year of like, can you be a suffocating defense? I know they had a lot of success last year, but can you consistently get to opposing quarterbacks? And I think the bigger question than that is just the offensive line. So you mentioned well, we can build. He's a good staff builder. My question is more, okay, I know he knows how to hire guys to recruit, but can you hire guys that can actually coach?
I said culture. I said the culture part of it. I didn't necessarily speak to like, and I do think he conceded this offseason, like, I maybe shouldn't be calling the plays on game day, and he's handing that off to. So I do think like he's observed he needed to make some changes and do some things differently with his staff. I'm with you that like the pieces and parts, like I think it's pretty clear he tried to build teams that were going to win national championships and were more finesse, because once you get out of the Big Ten, you got to be able to do that. But the problem is it's basically like, maybe a good analogy is like, it's what politicians used to be. Like you used to have to be like, okay, I'm going to say what I need to say with a little bit of wiggle room when I'm in my party's primary. And then once I get the bid for president, I'm going to be able to I didn't go too far down a rabbit hole where I can expound and be like, okay, I'm going to be more in the middle so that I can get some of those swing voters to vote for me. It's the same sort of thing. Like I think he tried to build this team that could both get out of the Big Ten and then win in in those the games that really mattered in the playoffs. And now he's got to kind of swing it back the other direction where it's like, okay, well, I got to focus on getting out of the Big Ten first. And that's also kind of funny because Michigan won this past year doing it like the old school Big Ten way. But yeah, I think like to me, like the players, the way they talk about Ryan Day and how it seems like he really takes care of his players. I think he is building a culture of kids that like want to come there and feel like it's a place that's going to make them better for the NFL, get more eyes on their game, all this different stuff. I mean, and that all plays into the recruiting piece, which is why I think he's a great recruiter. And I do think like he's proven, I mean, CJ Stroud is his Sistine Chapel. Like CJ Stroud is easily the best Ohio State quarterback that we can think of in the program's history to get to the NFL level, and at least at this point. And he obviously has a resume too of like getting Justin Fields to be a first-round pick. He got Dwayne Haskins to be a first-round pick. So I think like there is
real
something.
Quick, you're still talking about the things he does well. Like for you, what are the things he needs to do better? Because I think that's the difference between Ryan Day getting fired at the end of the year and not.
And I do. So I do think one of the things that he doesn't do well to me is just the personality side of it. Like you said, like there's not an authenticity to him, like publicly sometimes, where it seems like he gets the rivalry, like we talked about on the last show, where you had that with Urban, you had that with Tressel, you had that with other coaches. So I think like that's part of it. He's very robotic in that way. And I don't know, I'm assuming that's not how he is when he's in these recruiting meetings, because I think generally like young, Gen Zers today, they see right through that shit. So I don't necessarily think like he is like that in those meetings. Like maybe it's just like the media settings. I don't know. But that's one thing. And I do think, to your point, to go back to kind of where I started my rant in the beginning, I said I think he's good about like building a culture within like the players that he has. Like I think he really connects with the players. But I think you're right that like building the roster is a different question. I don't know that he's proven to this point that he can build this roster that can do different things and win different ways and has that physicality to it like we've talked about.
I think when it comes to roster building, that starts with talent development. When Marvin Harrison Jr. walks in as a truly great player, that's not talent development. That's just you recruited elite guys. So whether that's his coaching issue, meaning his coach's issues, meaning he's not hiring good talent developers, guys who really know the nuances of the position, or whether that's you're just not you're maybe not doing the best job of scouting the difference between an elite athlete that's a great football player, or that's an elite football player that's a great athlete, and those are two different things. I think that's a place that at some point he has to work on. I think demonstrating to everyone with beyond a shadow of a doubt that he actually does understand the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, and every day he has some eye on that rivalry. It's the first thing Jim Tressel did. It's the first thing Urban Meyer did. And at no point when Ryan tries to talk a good game about Michigan, and it still comes across as not legit. So he can't help that. You can't, you need to figure out what is within you that is inauthentic about it, and you need to do some self-scouting, and you need to really figure out why you're not beating Michigan. I think some of it is from that column A we just talked about. And then I think he has to win the right games. No one gives a shit about losing to Iowa or losing a game to Indiana or Purdue. Urban used to do that routinely. But if you beat Michigan, and now with these expanded playoffs, that one loss to Iowa or Indiana or Rutgers isn't going to kill you. If as long as you're beating Michigan, you're in the playoffs, and you've got a roster capable of winning a national championship, most years you're going to be in the Final Four. Most years you're going to be in the national championship game. Start there. It's about who you beat. And beating the right teams, because I think that's a big criticism. It's about really demonstrating and building a program that demonstrates. And how you do that is actually how they play in that game, but making sure that they know and everybody knows the importance of beating Michigan. And then I really think it all ties back to figuring out, is this a player developmental issue? Is it a scouting issue? Is it a coaching issue? But again, those three things to me, Spence, it's a razor-thin margin from where we want Ohio State to be and where they are now. It is they're so painfully close, and it's so obvious that's why sometimes I scoff when some Ohio State fans, like my guy Anthony Lima of the Morning Boys on 92.3 The Fan, just houses Ryan Day. It's like they're so close. They're right there. They are at the 1 yard line. And that 1 yard line is the difference between Ryan Day and Urban Meyer. That 1 yard line is the difference between Ryan Day and Jim Tressel. You don't have to win a championship every single year at Ohio State. But, man, you better have a serious crack 1 out of every 4 years, and you better be beating Michigan 3 out of 4 years, or certainly 2 out of 4 years where you're at least saying you're even in that rivalry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like some of the recent recruiting news we've seen revolves around Ohio State really going all in on some offensive line recruits, which certainly speaks to trying to beat, Michigan in particular, but some of these other teams in the Big Ten that are going to give you a run. Or challenge you. But it's also interesting because like with Oregon coming in, they're also one of those teams that's kind of a finesse team. So you got to, again, sort of keep that balance. But yeah, like there's certainly a lot to prove for him this year. And yeah, like if you don't beat the right teams this year, if you don't make a run to a national championship, and I understand like the playoffs different this year, it's a little bit tougher road because you got potentially 4 games to play instead of 2. But like if he doesn't do that, then I do think there's a scenario at the end of the season where we are talking about moving on from Ryan Day, even though you and I are sitting here saying like the grass isn't always green on the other side. At some point, you're going to have to make the call. And I think, Nick, what's interesting about this, and we can get into obviously some of the Ross Bjork stuff as well, when you have a new AD coming in, it's always like I think there's already an immense amount of pressure on Ryan Day this year. But I think it gets ramped up even higher when you have a new athletic director coming in who didn't choose you. Like this was not you. This was not his hire. And these ADs generally, when they go to different schools, they're looking to leave their mark by hiring the head coach that makes their football program great. And now Ross Bjork is coming from a situation where he kept the incumbent coach around and gave him an extension. That's one of the big knocks on him. But that's always, I think that adds some pressure here to the situation as well when you have a new AD who isn't necessarily tied to you. So yeah, like this is the year for Ryan Day to get it done, or else, or that's it, or else really like this could be him, and I think he recognized that, which is why he, did the things he did, hired Chip Kelly, gave up play calling, and has kind of tried to build this super team roster that he thinks has a chance to beat anybody in the country.
So I think Lincoln Riley in Los Angeles has a significant amount of pressure. I even think Kirk Ferentz has pressure on him despite coming off a 7-win Big Ten year, won 7 games in the Big Ten last year and had a decent year for Iowa, but they made him fire his own son. Yeah, that's when you're forced to fire somebody, especially in their blood, you probably have more pressure on you than people realize. But Ryan Day has every conceivable pressure. You've lost the biggest rivalry in college football 3 straight years. You have, as of right now, the expectation is you win at least 1 national championship. And when you do that, the pressure really goes off. He hasn't won that national championship yet. And then, oh yes, he's got a new AD. So it's funny, Ross Bjork, new Ohio State AD, was on with the Morning Boys on 92.3 The Fan, of course, our day job. And Ross was effusive in his praise of Ryan Day and his support in Ryan Day. Here's what Ross had to say.
My job is to make sure that we are in the best position, and that is working with Coach Day. What are the resources? What are the barriers to success? Look, if you think about those 8 losses, think about how close those plays were. I mean, a play here and there, and that thing swings completely the other way. So we are in the mix. We're right there on the dance floor. that's where you want to be. We're a dynasty program in many ways. When I talked to Coach Day, I asked him, I said, Coach, what is the program identity in your mind? And he said elite. And that is the standard. And so, look, my job is to find those little things, find those little edges, make sure that, look, if there's any distractions, let me handle those. Coach the game, coach your coaches, make sure the culture's right, make sure the leadership right. That's what I've been really impressed as I've seen Coach Day here in the offseason is he's really working on the culture and the chemistry and the leadership. We have talent. We have great coaches. That's the easy part. The hard part is what are those little margins? And so I think that's where I can help. I've seen it at different levels. I've seen challenges. I've seen good things. I've seen bad things. We all use our experiences to get better, and that's where I'll support Coach Day at the highest level. Look, my job is to make sure that we are.
So it's interesting. One, he's actually saying similar things to you and I that the program's really not that far off. One, if somebody, hey, how would you describe your program? And you say the word elite, that's a buzzword. That means literally nothing. So even in that alleged answer to Ross Bjork from Ryan Day about what the program is, that doesn't mean anything. That's like, how about, we're champions. That's what we're building for. But also, like, there's so many things in there you can scoff at. Oh, we're a dynasty program. Well, dynasty programs have won a national championship sooner than the last 10 years. At the same point, I think people got up in arms. Ohio State fans got up in arms when they heard this. And I'm like, guys, it's July. That's what an incoming AD says in July. That's not going to be the same message. Ross Bjork would have to be an idiot to come out and say, beat Michigan or your ass is grass. Because so many things happen throughout the year, and you never know which way the grass is blowing or the wind is blowing until you're actually in the moment. So I think people looked at this like, man, I guess we should just shut it down with the no, he said exactly what I expected him to say. And he just had a couple cliches there that I thought were scoff-worthy that I want to make fun of.
Yeah, I mean, and as that answer went on and on when I was listening to it in real time, I could feel a Swiss smoke being blown up my shorts. Like that's basically what, like, it just felt like the very PR answer.
Nice.
That you, the very
usually got to pay extra for that, Spence.
Not this time, I didn't. It just felt like, what an AD would say coming into a program and not wanting to like ruffle feathers and just be like, his ass is grass. He's in trouble. So I don't know what else he was really supposed to say there. But I did think it was interesting that he talked about, again, we like you say, similar things that we've talked about. It sounds like Ryan Day is focused on the things that he's good at, which are like building the culture and, making sure the players are in the right situation to win. And I do think as an AD coming in, you are kind of asking questions about like, how can I help make us better? What can I do? And the number one answer is always going to be, well, help us get more money, help us with our NIL stuff. And I'm sure that's part of the reason why Bjork is there, to help with those things. But yeah, like at the end of the day, like it's one thing on July, whatever date that was, July 17th, to be saying some of those things. It's another thing when the dust settles on another loss to Michigan, and all you hear is the fan base in Columbus clamoring for Ryan Day to be fired. So I take it all with a grain of salt, and I do think it's yet another reason why there's immense pressure on Ryan Day. And a couple weeks back when I did a solo show, I talked about that specifically, like which coach is under the most pressure. And I do think the answer is Ryan Day. I think maybe like a Marcus Freeman might be a close second. I think you I brought up Lincoln Riley as another answer on this list.
I think Lincoln Riley's ahead of Marcus Freeman. Nobody expects a damn thing where Marcus Freeman is. No offense to Marcus Freeman, by the way.
Well, maybe not outside of Notre Dame, but I think Notre Dame is like, well,
there is pressure, but I think like Lincoln Riley could be fired if
true.
They're not in the playoff this year.
I think
that's interesting.
I think he's on that list. I think Glenn Kiffin's on that list because, now that Nick Saban's gone, what are you going to do? And the SEC, are you going to be the next challenger to Georgia, that type of thing? So I think there's a couple other answers, but I think Ryan Day is number one. And the pressures of having a new AD coming in is like, that makes it twofold. He already had a lot of pressure. Now I think it's even more, it's ramped up even more because of the fact that there's no guarantee that this guy's going to just hang on to you. Now, maybe the one thing working in his favor, like I brought up earlier, is that the last time he sort of came in with an incumbent head coach, he gave him an extension rather than fire him. So maybe that works in Ryan Day's favor, but we'll see.
Does Ohio State have more pressure on them going into this season than any other program in college football? And can you say the same thing about Ryan Day amongst head coaches? 4 down territory. Next, with Nick Wilson, Spencer German. This is Sons of the Shoe. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, it's time for 4 down territory, and we're going to start, well, conveniently with Big Ten Media Days. Ryan Day speaking this week. You heard from Chip Kelly. He's going to call the plays from up in the sky. We also heard from pretty much just about everybody at Big Ten Media Days. But starting with you, Spence, what stood out the most and what you heard from Ryan Day from the Ohio State contingent?
Yeah, so real quick, I was going to say one of the big things that stood out about Big Ten Media Day as a whole. Did you see the massive floating duck that Oregon put in the river there in downtown Indianapolis? Did you see that?
I did. It turns out Oregon gives a duck. No.
I see what you did there.
I've been waiting about 41 minutes into this podcast to make that heinous joke. By the way, did you start recording? Because it's
recording.
You sure? Because my recording number is not changing.
If
I just wasted the give a duck moment, I will be infuriated.
That sounds like a Nick Wilson internet problem. You know, you've been moving. Maybe the connection's not as strong in the new house. I don't know, but on my end, I'm seeing it tick up. So
all right, well that's good. Oh, now it moved. That's good because that give a duck line is primo bad joke.
We didn't want to miss that.
I love that, but man, you better beat Oregon.
That's what I was going to say. It was like,
I'm going to tell you,
who are you to show up on the doorstep of Big Ten Media Day with this big ass duck in the middle of this river in Indianapolis? Like, what the hell? That is quite the statement. Like, you either got that. If you're Oregon, you got to win the Big Ten, and if you're everybody else in the Big Ten, you got to be rolling your eyes like, fuck these guys.
Well, here's the thing. There's one team it puts a little more pressure on. Ohio State has been, and I can't really say it because Michigan literally ran the Big Ten last year and ran college football, but Ohio State is the best program pretty consistently in this conference. It is on them. They get a crack at it, or halfway through the season. Don't miss Ryan Day. I'm gonna tell you, you give these mother duckers, you give them a chance, and they're gonna make you eat it. And I'm just telling you, Dan Lanning's not the guy you want to lose to, because don't make me hate Dan Lanning by losing to him. I'd rather like him when you whoop his ass.
I actually, when we have some time, obviously, but I actually have an interesting take about that Oregon matchup that we'll get to later on. I'll tease it here, but I don't want to give it all away. But yeah, we'll get to that coming up.
You have to listen to every single segment, every single podcast. And we're not even going to tell you when that take finally comes up. You're going to have to tell us when you finally hear it. Yeah.
You'll have to circle back in the YouTube.
Our minute by minute ratings are going through the roof.
I hope so. In terms of what I took away overall from Ryan Day, I'll play this clip for you real quick. He talked a lot about just the outside noise, and we know there's a lot of pressure. We just talked about it, but here's what he had to say about them trying to block some of that stuff out.
Our focus is on this preseason. It's the next step, and sure, a lot of coaches will say it. You can't really focus on what happened the year before. You can't get too worried about what's coming down the road. But we all know there's a lot of, noise and a lot of hype around this team. And what we can't do is, let those distractions, grab our focus from what we need to do day in and day out. We know it's going to be a long season, but we got to have a great preseason. We got to have a physical preseason. We got to lay that foundation for what's going to come as we head throughout the season. But we're very, very excited about our guys. We have great experience in that locker room and some great talent, but it's going to take more than talent. It's going to take all the no talent issues to get to where we want to be and reach our goals. Our focus.
What's interesting about that clip, Nick, is it falls in line with everything we talked about. I think this episode with Ryan Day is like, what does he do well? And honestly, like, blocking out the outside noise isn't one of the things that I'm not worried about with this group. And I think part of it is maybe there's been outside noise about the Michigan game that's kind of trickled in, and that's maybe the one area where you're like, well, is he going to let that whole the build up to that get the best of him again? But other than that, like, Ohio State lives in this world where they're always in the national championship conversation. And I also think because this group is very upperclassmen heavy, you have all these guys coming back from last year who want to, accomplish greater things than they have at Ohio State. I think that too makes it where you have this group that will make sure that isn't becoming a distraction and that they are able to do that. So as much as I know Ryan Day gets criticized for just everything, I actually, that's not something I'm worried about with this group specifically. I think they will do a pretty good job of not paying attention to all that stuff because they know they're great and they're not going to let it become, as Nick Saban would say, rat poison in their locker room.
So moving on to second down, Connor Stallions is going to get a Netflix documentary about his story, about his journey. And I just have to know, are you going to be watching the Connor Stallions documentary in 1 month's time?
Interestingly enough, my wife and I recently, we cut Netflix for a little bit because we were like, we need to save a little bit more money. Budget's getting tighter. Everything's expensive these days. And
Joe Biden.
And we've talked about what would make us get Netflix back. And so there's certain shows where it's once Stranger Things season 5 drops next year, we're gonna get Netflix back because we enjoy that show. It's a good show. But that's a year from now. This comes out next month. And when I saw this come across my Twitter feed, I was like, is it worth getting back Netflix a month after we dropped it to watch the Connor Stallions documentary on Untold, nonetheless, which aside from, I think, the Tim Donaghy doc they did was really good. That one was pretty thorough. I thought the Manti Te'o one was really interesting. And the Johnny Manziel one was only enlightening because Johnny Manziel shared some stories that we hadn't heard before. But even that one was like a Johnny Manziel billboard. It was just basically him being able to talk about where he is now and how you didn't get the other perspectives on things. And I think the epitome of the Untold series really is the Swamp Kings one with Urban and his Florida dynasty that he built with Tim Tebow and all that, because that was literally just an Urban Meyer Florida puff piece the entire time. And that's kind of the reputation of Untold, is that they do these documentaries and it's just a puff piece. So I don't know that it's going to be worth me getting Netflix back just to watch this, because anything that is good is just going to end up on Twitter anyway, and I can see it there.
So I just want to kudos, congratulations to Connor Stallions for milking this 15 minutes of fame as much as possible. I actually have another solution that I just kind of came up with off the top of my head here. I think we should get a dating show featuring Connor Stallions and Hawk Tua Girl. And at the end of every episode, she says, Connor, I'm not going to give you Hawk Tua. So instead of getting a rose, the show ends when she finally spits on that thing. Connor, I will not spit on that thing tonight. Thank you. And then he walks away because he really wanted her to spit on that thing. And he's like, I know, I just know one day she'll spit on that thing. And maybe, here's the thing, you get 10 episodes in, if she doesn't spit on that thing, that's just not true love.
He's like, hey, I'm pretty good about reading signs. And I thought I read all the signs right this time. Yeah. I thought I was in line for it. But, man, women are just hard to figure out. Harder than Ohio State's offense. Come on, you didn't like that one at all? That was pretty good. That was pretty good, Nick. Come on, man.
So moving to third down. Now, this is Ross Bjork from the morning show still, correct?
Yes.
Ross Bjork when he was on the morning show, we played the sound in the second segment of him talking about Ryan Day's future. He also talked about the importance of continuing to find revenue streams, because, God, nothing gets me hotter than revenue stream talk. And I would say submitted a bold idea about naming rights for Ohio Stadium.
I made a comment about never say never about maybe selling the naming right to Ohio Stadium. Look, we need to have those conversations, and we need to be transparent about the new era of college athletics. So communication and how we communicate will be, ultra important moving into this new era. So it's really all those fundamentals. Look, we're in a leadership position. How we use our voice is just as important as what we say. It's one thing to kind of pound your fist on the table and say, you need to listen to us because we're Ohio State. It doesn't really work that way. What we want to do is be thoughtful, and we want to be really, really intelligent about what we do say so it does have meaning when we do speak up. And we will use our voice. We will make sure that we're in prime position like we always have been. People are chasing us in many ways, and that's a great position to be in, but we have a great responsibility to make sure we do it the right way.
So I got to say, I listened to the full interview. I don't know that I came away feeling better about Ross Bjork. I felt there was a lot of disingenuous. I think it's very early for Ross to say things like "we" when Ross really just got to campus a couple months back. I understand that we're all whores now. I understand that every team just wants to bilk out every single ounce of money that they possibly can. And I understand that there's nothing wrong with having the conversation about should we sell the naming rights to Ohio Stadium. But this is not the same thing to me as Ohio State builds a new $2.5 billion retractable roof stadium and sells the naming rights. This is the opus of college football. Like there are 30 stadiums in America that when you walk in, you feel some sort of way. I'm not a Notre Dame fan, never been one. When I walked into Notre Dame Stadium, I felt history wash over me. All right. When I have been to the Big House, as much as I hate to admit it, I walk in there in awe of what that place has seen. And when an Ohio State fan from 3 years old or however, when they finally put like a little jersey on, everybody's got that little, it's either that or a Browns thing like Brady Quinn with like, you got like a little Ohio State or Browns, and they get the football. Whenever it was that I became an Ohio State fan, since I was incredibly young, Ohio Stadium means something. And so if you want to be a whore about almost everything else, that's fine. You want to sell, it's the progressive head coach position, Ryan Day. That's the name of his job title. I don't give a flying fuck. If you want to go ahead and put up anything else, and I mean anything else, sell seat naming rights, sell shitter naming rights. Hey, you're taking a douche right now, and this toilet, this bowel movement brought to you by McDonald's.
Dude wipes.
Yeah. Amen. Hallelujah.
By the way, Dude Wipes, if you want to sponsor Sons of the Shoe, we're always open for opportunities. Just saying.
So, yeah, sponsor bowel movements at Ohio Stadium and sponsor this. Yeah, that's a great. It's a really great.
I mean, hey, Nick, I'm just saying, people like to listen to podcasts sometimes while they're having a bowel movement. Maybe that is our lane. Who knows?
There's someone taking a dunk right now with you and me, just like, right on, guys. Speak truth to power. Now, with that being said, it is fine to have the conversation. Should we sell the naming rights to Ohio Stadium? As long as everybody in the room looks right back at Ross Bjork and says, shut the fuck up. No. This is you know me. Have you ever seen me offended? How many times in the eons that we've known each other, how many times have you actually seen me offended?
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you offended, but I think I've heard you offended on the show a few times.
On my show?
Something that like Keith would have said or something.
All right, that's probably fair. But like, this offends me. This is not a good idea. This is trash. I cannot strongly speak enough against this idea, so much so that last sentence barely made any sense in English.
So it's funny because normally, like we have this conversation in relation to like NFL teams and their new stadiums and where's it going to be, and how is the fan base going to rally around it? And I've seen stadium names in the NFL get changed all the time, and there's always some attachment to like what the name used to be. I mean, like I think a good example with us being in Cleveland is like Progressive Field, right? Everybody still tries to just call that place the Jake. Let's just be honest. But we've all kind of come around to the idea that's like, okay, it's Progressive Field. We accept it. We move on. Like that's kind of what it is. So normally I'm in the camp of like, this isn't the biggest deal in the world. It's another revenue stream. Fine, whatever. And if that's what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. And we'll just move on. And I think what's interesting too is like Ryan Day talked about this at Big Ten Media Day the other day too, where he basically, like, he alluded to his comments about, hey, in 5 years, college football is going to look a lot different than it does right now. And how he was like, and I bet you when they built that stadium, the people sitting in the bleachers back then didn't ever envision it becoming what it is today. And Ross Bjork also talked about how, like, they need to renovate it. And so, like, maybe there's a sponsorship deal there where, like, they help fund the renovation and then they get their name on the stadium. I don't know, whatever it might be. But I generally would fall in the camp of, like, these things, like, we get too attached to them. But college football, to your point, Nick, is the one place where I covet tradition and to an extent. Like, I'm okay with the NIL stuff happening and that stuff changing and the amateurism going away. But I do think, like, the way that the people who are also anti that stuff, the way you get them back is by keeping the traditions alive, like Ohio State-Michigan rivalry and the stadiums, the historic stadiums, and little moments that you've seen College Football 25, the video game, make sure we're included in the game, jump around being played at Wisconsin, like different stuff like that, that keeps people feeling those warm and fuzzies about the program that they grew up loving and following their entire lives, and then they went to school there. Like, so I'm with you that stuff matters, and to preserve that, selling the naming rights to Ohio Stadium is blasphemy.
Yeah, it's been there 100 years. If they want to name the field to go ahead and renovate the stadium, you know what? Go ahead, Pookie.
Yeah.
You do you. I'm proud of you. You look at you got your name on the field. But it's so weird, man. Like, we've all just been accepted. We've normalized. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it's just another revenue stream. How much is that actually worth? Like, I mean, looking at some of that, like some places get $5 million a year. Is that really worth it? And maybe it is to Ross Bjork. It's not to me as an Ohio State fan. And I would sooner cut off my big toe than call it like
She might be going a different direction.
The Chuck E. Cheese horseshoe brought to you by Trojan condoms. No, no, thank you. Like, if this turns into Guaranteed Rate Field or it's Smoothie King Center, burn it down. I would rather Ohio Stadium,
the Raisin
be
Cane's
burnt down
horseshoe
with Ross Bjork pissing on the ashes. I'd rather that happen.
The Skyline Chili Bowl.
It is the OnlyFans put it in the butt bowl. Like, blow it all the way out your ass with that. All right. Speaking of blowing it out your ass, that's probably still better than our fourth down topic here, as UCLA head coach Deshaun Foster was introduced at the Big Ten media. It's a big send-up. And, then this happened for Deshaun Foster.
Coach Foster, welcome to the Big Ten. We'll begin with your opening statement.
How you guys doing? I'm happy to be here. Glad to be a part of this great conference. Finally putting two great emblems together, UCLA and the Big Ten. We're a school that's won, 123 championships, so this fits us being right in this conference. Football-wise, we're just excited. I'm sure you guys don't know too much about UCLA, but our football program, but we're in LA. It's us and USC. I'm just basically excited, really. That's it. Any questions?
Okay. All right. Now, I know.
I felt bad for the guy, I'm going to be honest.
So I don't think it's as bad if you watch the video. Like, on radio, we only played the audio.
Yeah.
And listening to the audio, I felt like my fingernails were slowly being removed by a terrorist organization. It felt the equivalent of emotional waterboarding. Now, that being said, how Deshaun Foster talked about the UCLA football program is pretty much how any of us would have talked. So what do you know about the UCLA football program?
The same that you know.
Yeah, well, they're in LA, as you may know, with USC. They
Chip Kelly used to be their coach, and now he's the offensive coordinator at Ohio State.
They're very excited to be here. And any questions? That's in fairness, that is really the only thing to talk about the UCLA football program for the last probably 30 years. So it makes sense that I listen, I'm not going to hammer the guy. Like, this dude 3 months ago wasn't going to be a head, well, not even 3 months ago. This guy 6 months ago was not on the trajectory to be a head coach. And if he was going to be, he was going to have to go to a much smaller program and build his way up. So I am empathetic. Also, some dudes just aren't good at press conferences.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I'm not going to hammer the guy for it. But if you think that the folks at UCLA are happy with that as the optic about UCLA's first day in the Big Ten, first Big Ten media days, to me, it's a non-issue today, his first Big Ten media day. But Deshaun has to get better at this, because this is the kind of thing that sells your football program. And I don't want to hammer him. He seems like a nice dude and maybe just a bit introverted. But man, if you have a 3-win season this year, this is going to be held against you.
So I said it already, but I did kind of feel bad for him, because this definitely felt like a situation where that's just not his element. He's not comfortable with that stuff. What I will say, though, spin to all this. Yes, he's going to have to win now and, make up for all this and whatever, especially as a first-time head coach. But there's no such thing as bad PR these days, right? Like, I actually think this works out for him in the sense of, hey, there's probably people out there who couldn't have even told you who the UCLA coach was prior to Big Ten Media Day. Now everybody knows who the
He's
UCLA
a moron.
Well, hey, we said the same thing about Nick Sirianni when he was at the Eagles. He had a terrible first press conference, and then 2 years later, he was taking his team to the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that's going to happen with UCLA, that they're going to like win the Big Ten this year or something.
We're going to head this chapter off as Spencer German thinks Deshaun Foster is next Nick Sirianni. That's how.
Hey, whatever we got to do to get the clicks up. You know what I'm saying? Get Dude Wipe sponsoring the podcast. I'll take it. But no.
Flush it down. Ooh, we can say that after like a bad take. You know what, Spencer? I can't believe you're saying that take is so awful, you got to flush it down.
Good idea, actually, for a sponsorship opportunity for Dude Wipes. We have, during the season, the like it, love it, or leave it segment. What if we made it like it, love it, or flush it?
Ooh.
Something that we got to flush away.
Yeah.
Dude Wipes comes in and sponsors that.
Get
Boom.
the plunger. Oh, wait, you don't need it because you've got Dude Wipes.
Oh, man. All right. Well, no better way to end the show than right there.
All right, guys. Well, hopefully you don't flush this entire segment, the entire podcast down the drain. Make sure
this
to
is
follow.
One of our best segments ever, honestly.
Follow Sons of the Shoe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? Follow Sons of the Shoe today. Damn you. The power of the Sons of Shoe compels you. And also make sure to subscribe to the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel. If you haven't been there yet, search 92.3 The Fan in YouTube. We are on one of the playlists there. Please make sure to like our videos, comment our videos. And Spencer, it's been a great show, but it's time to flush it down.
Nick, always a pleasure.